Hello, and welcome to the Applicant Podcast. I'm Rebecca TRIPP, and happy Canada Day. I thought this week's solo episode, I could do a quick summary on citizenship. I think a lot of Canadian citizens take their citizenship for granted. There's a lot of rights and responsibilities with it, and there is a significant difference between citizens in Canada and permanent residents. And so this week's episode, I want to discuss what is Canadian citizenship, what's the difference between citizenship and permanent residency, which groups of people are born as citizens, and who can obtain citizenship, and lastly, how. So to start, let's go over quickly, and hopefully this isn't too boring, but let's just go over the definition of a Canadian citizen. So a Canadian citizen is essentially someone that is described as a citizen under the Citizenship Act. And what exactly that means is that it's a person who is a Canadian by birth, so either born in Canada or born outside of Canada, to a Canadian citizen who was themselves either born in Canada or granted citizenship. Or it's a person who has applied for a grant of citizenship and has received Canadian citizenship. So this is also called naturalization. So just going one step further, what is naturalization? A related term is a grant of citizenship. So essentially, it's the formal process by which a person who is not a Canadian citizen can become a Canadian citizen. So this person usually becomes a permanent resident first, and then after a period of time, they apply for citizenship. So what's the difference between permanent residents and Canadian citizens? So both have a lot of the same rights and responsibilities. Both have to pay taxes. Both are able to work and live anywhere across Canada, and both enjoy the rights under the Charter rights and freedoms, and both have the right to enter and remain in Canada. But there are significant differences between these two different groups and immigration statuses. So to quickly run through them, permanent resident holders cannot serve in the Army. They can't vote in any election. They cannot run for public office in any level of government. They actually do risk being deported if they are convicted of a serious crime. They also have to apply to renew their status. So essentially every 5 years, their PR card expires. So they have to keep on applying and keep on renewing their status. Where if you're a Canadian citizen, once you're a citizen, you're a citizen. You don't have to reapply every year, 5 years or 10 years. So another difference is that the children of Canadian citizens, whether naturalized or born in Canada, they may automatically be considered a Canadian citizen, regardless of where that child is born. But children of permanent residency card holders, if they're born outside of Canada, they do not enjoy the same status. They don't automatically become permanent residents of Canada or citizens of Canada. And lastly, and this is probably like the biggest one that everyone really knows and identifies with, is that permanent residency holders, they just have a PR card. They don't have Canadian passports. So only Canadian citizens can have a Canadian passport. So going one step further, who is automatically a Canadian citizen? So most people that are born in Canada automatically obtain Canadian citizenship. There are a lot of countries out there that have laws against birth tourism. So essentially, if a citizen of another country comes into their country and has a baby, that baby automatically doesn't get citizenship because they were born on their soil. Canada really doesn't have these types of laws. So if two individuals come to Canada and they give birth to a child, that child, because they're born on Canadian soil, obtains Canadian citizenship. There are some exceptions to this rule. So for example, if the parents were in Canada for diplomatic reasons, or they hold an office position of another country and they were in Canada for work, that doesn't mean that their children automatically become citizens. And there are a few other exceptions, but generally speaking, if you're born in Canada, you obtain Canadian citizenship. If you're not born in a country where they have these types of laws, you basically become stateless, and you could become an individual with no citizenship. And that's a whole other topic, a whole other episode. But there are situations where that happens, where if your parents came to that country and gave birth to you and they don't automatically grant you citizenship for being born in that country, and say you're from a country, say those parents are from a country where, unless you're born on their land, you don't obtain citizenship, that really can lead individuals into being stateless individuals. They don't have a citizenship, they don't have a passport, and it leads to a lot of issues. So that is possible, but not for individuals that are born in Canada. It's not really something that happens when it comes to Canada. Lastly, the definition of being born in Canada is actually much more broad than people think. So it can also include people born in Canadian like airspace. So if you're on a plane above Canada, you could qualify for being born in Canada. And also being born in Canadian waters. So say if there's a person that's born on a Canadian vessel, or again, like a Canadian aircraft, they could qualify for Canadian citizenship. Another example of people who are automatically Canadian citizens are people that are born to parents that are Canadian citizens, but they're born outside of Canada. So say, for example, two Canadian citizens travel to another country and give birth there. Just because they were born outside Canada doesn't mean that they aren't Canadian citizens. Because their parents are Canadian citizens, they can actually obtain Canadian citizenship. And a lot of countries have this, and a lot of countries, it's not about even both parents, it's just one parent. If they have citizenship, their children can qualify to obtain citizenship. So there are some exceptions to this rule. People born outside of Canada on or after April 17, 2009 to a Canadian parent are only considered Canadian citizens if that parent was either naturalized a Canadian or born in Canada. So the exception serves to limit the generations of Canadian citizens that are born outside of Canada and essentially have no connection to the country. So effectively, this means that only one generation of Canadians can be born outside of Canada. This doesn't trickle down to different generations and children who have children outside of Canada. So lastly, who can become a Canadian citizen? So we just discussed, how can you obtain citizenship, but who can become a Canadian citizen? So permanent residency holders can apply for citizenship. They are able to do so at the time of recording this episode. Permanent residency holders may apply for grants of citizenship if they lived in Canada as a permanent resident for 3 out of the last 5 years and have met other requirements. So no criminal record, have filed their taxes, etc. So the 3 out of 5 years for living in Canada is different than permanent residency renewals. There's a difference. So in order to maintain permanent residency status, you have to be in Canada 2 out of the last 5 years. So some people are permanent residents, they reapply every 5 years and they keep on just maintaining their permanent residency status. But if they don't stay in Canada for longer than 2 out of 5 years, It doesn't matter how long you're a permanent resident for. If you don't hit that 3 out of 5 years living in Canada, you don't qualify and you won't be able to apply for citizenship. You could apply, but it will be denied. It won't be granted. So just to kind of add to this, some time spent in Canada as a temporary resident may count towards this requirement. In part of the nationalization process, permanent residency holders between the ages of 18 and 54 are required to prove sufficient language skills in either official language, English or French, and they actually have to pass a citizenship exam as well, citizenship test. Another way that a person can become a Canadian citizen is by being adopted. So children that are adopted are considered to be born in the first generation outside of Canada. Therefore, they cannot pass their citizenship to their children if their children are born outside of Canada, but they can obtain citizenship once they're adopted. So essentially you go through the process of adoption and then you go through the process of applying for citizenship for your child if you're adopting an individual abroad outside of Canada. So lastly, I thought for this episode, I would do a quick frequently asked questions. I get a lot of questions about citizenship, and I thought this would be a good opportunity to answer some of them. So firstly, I've been asked, if I lose my passport, do I lose my citizenship? If my passport expires, does that mean that I am no longer a citizen? And the answer to this is no. And I can understand how people can ask this question because with permanent residency or temporary residency, you know, those status documents are very important. And if those status documents expire, it means your status expires. But if you're a Canadian citizen, you're a Canadian citizen. That's it. If your passport expires, I know a lot of people who are Canadian citizens who don't have valid passports because they don't travel abroad. And that doesn't make them any less of a Canadian citizen. Passports are a result of status. They don't hold status. So if you have your passport expire or say it gets destroyed or damaged, that doesn't change your status in any way. Another question I get is, how long does it take to become a citizen? So essentially there's the residency requirements. You have to be in Canada for 3 of the last 5 years as a permanent resident before you can qualify. And once you apply for permanent residency, it's an astonishing 27-month processing time. So from the date that you apply for your citizenship, it can take 27 months to process. So what might actually happen is that you apply for citizenship, you meet the residency requirements, say it takes 2 years to obtain your citizenship. Well, a lot can change in 2 years. So what I like to do with any applications that have a long processing time is that I send a quick update, like a letter that complements your original application that just says, hey, like everything's the same, nothing has changed, or say your address has changed, here's the new address, and basically just update that application as it's in processing. Unfortunately, you know, due to COVID, but even before COVID, immigration processing times they're insane. They are so long, and there is a huge backlog. I think it's at like 2.5 million applications are currently like pending right now. And express entry in July 2022, which is we're almost in July, which is when I'm recording this. Express entry is opening back up, which I think means that there's going to be more applications pending. So that number is not going to get lower. So yeah, just be mindful of processing times when you're applying. And when it comes to citizenship, it's 27 months. That's everything for today. Hopefully this was a really quick, an interesting episode for anyone that's interested in Canadian citizenship. Thank you for listening to the end of this episode and for the support if you're still here. And I hope you have a great Canada Day, and tune in next week for another episode of the Applicant Podcast. Oh, and one last thing before I end this episode. If you're someone who likes to read this information versus listening to it or watching it on YouTube, this episode is a blog post on my website. So www.rebeccabtripp.com. Lucas Weinhardt helped me write this blog post and create the script for this episode. So a big shout out to him, and thank you for all your hard work on helping me pull this together. So yeah, if you want to visit my website, you can read it as well. And there's other resources as well on my website. So I encourage you to check it out. Okay, bye now.